Have you ever found yourself stuck in the planning phase of a project, spending hours brainstorming and trying to perfect the first step? How many dream projects never got started or were abandoned because you wanted to get every single detail perfect from the first try? By simply starting with something perfectible and giving yourself a time limit, you can get the wheel turning and build momentum towards your goal. Over the past 5 years, while building as a solo startup founder of my location-based language exchange app, SewaYou, I have learned that every great accomplishment in life can only be achieved after thousands of iterations over something you are obsessed with. In the grand scheme of things, the first step does not matter as much as the relentless pursuit of making the next iterations better. In a context of startup or building a product, like Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, said, if you are not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you have launched too late. And this actually not only applies just for product building, but to almost every aspect of life. As a personal example, my startup SewaYou started with an idea to connect local people who want to practice a foreign language with foreigners who were struggling getting their paperwork done, like opening a bank account or going to the city wards because they cannot speak the local language. Back then, I didn't conduct extensive market research because I experienced that myself firsthand when helping out foreigners' friends handling their paperwork. Nor did I send 50 surveys to ask my surroundings about their problems. You know, the classic framework we're taught in the startup world. After that, I just bought a notebook and draft a quick mock-up. And at that time, I didn't know that we could do all of that on softwares like Sketch or Figma. I just wanted to dump all my ideas I had as quickly as possible using whatever I have at my disposal. I even designed the logo myself to avoid the hassle of finding and working with a freelancer. I didn't have any prior experience hiring freelancers, and since the project was something I was working on in my free time after my day job, it didn't feel necessary to hire someone else to design the logo. I mean, you can always change it later. Companies like Apple or Airbnb do that too. 3 months of coding and learning later, I released a quick prototype out there to the world, and I got lots of feedback to iterate over the product. That's when the interesting thing happens. Everything seems to fall into place and it becomes tangible, not just a concept in my head. It was out there used by real people on their phone or computer. I work towards progress by improving my skills with each iteration and validating my hypothesis with actual data rather than relying solely on my thoughts and assumptions. After sticking with building part-time a startup for a few years, it became clear to me that the perfect step doesn't exist. I might be stuck with analysis paralysis if I wanted to get everything perfect from the first try. Sometimes indecisions is worse than taking a bad decision because the latter will teach you a lesson and help you learn from your mistakes, while the former can lead to missed opportunities and stagnant growth. And that's the thing about startup or entrepreneurship in general. There's often no clear roadmap or playbook to follow, and you must be willing to take risks and make decisions based on incomplete information. Like when you play an open world game where the map becomes visible to you only when you start exploring a new area and information becomes available to you. You can argue that in some games you can just find the item that could reveal the entire map. Well, that's another topic to discuss. While there are some common mistakes that you can avoid by knowing from others' experience, two-person circumstances will never be the same, so everyone's journey is unique. You may encounter obstacles and challenges that others didn't face, and you may find success in areas that were difficult for your peers. So just start something perfectible so you can get the wheel started, and once it's started, it becomes much more easier to keep doing the things. Iterate or die. I wrote a tweet ago that, of course, nobody reads, but it goes like this. Most people talk but don't build. Most people build but don't finish. And most people finish but don't release. Most people release but don't iterate. I stick and iterated over 5 years with my initial startup idea, accumulating more than 5,500 commits on GitHub across multiple repositories for my app SewaYou. That's 4 years part-time and 1 year full-time of coding, designing, refactoring, fixing weird bugs, migrating production data to new databases, adding new features, and deprecating unused features, and I can go on. The app starts to see more growth and retention only when the product is more stable, polished, and more importantly, more distributed. people start to recommend the app to their friends, but the app should be worth recommended to begin with. My personal aha moment as a founder came when I realized that there were some power users on my app with a higher session count than me. This meant that they were using the app more frequently than I was, despite my obsessive testing and usage of the app every single day for the past few years. And some of these users had only been using the app for less than a year. Then I got my first few paid users, then successfully fundraised as a solo founder, and I talk more about that in this video. You can watch it after this one if you're interested to learn more. Over the course of those 5 years, I saw some of my acquaintances change their LinkedIn profile titles from XYZ startup name founder to open to work. You know, life can get in the way and people's priority can change. Passion for an idea last year might not be a priority this year, and monthly paycheck destroy dreams. But here I am, still iterating on my startup and keep moving forward. Most of the time, it's just that the iteration count isn't high enough to reach the tipping point. Like Paul Graham from YC said, most startups don't die because they run out of money. They die because the founders get demoralized. It's usually not because the product fails, but because they don't relentlessly iterate it or improve it enough. In other words, most startups don't die, they commit suicide. Also, we heard a lot from startup advisors saying that you know you have something that people want when they're willing to put their credit card on your landing page when you don't even have a beta version yet. This is more an exception than a rule. Users, especially consumer app users' expectations are crazy high. If they find a single friction or bug in your app, then 90% of chance they will uninstall your app and find a competitor or even move on with their life and just keep carrying along the issue they're trying to solve with your app in the first place. So don't believe for a second that a buggy, garbage, or average product stands the chance, while there are so many existing apps out there. No product is unique on its own anymore nowadays. A product strives because they are better from a product point of view, or they are better distributed and has tons of users, but that's specific to product with network effect, where the value of the network grows with the number of users, but you got the idea. What I'm trying to say is that most founders give up too soon and blame that there's no market or need for their product, while their product hasn't reached the maturity it needs to fit the market in terms of functionality, but also from a positioning and messaging point of view. I know a couple of people who build 10 average products and none of them have reached a point where they can truly say, well, I try and exhausted all my iteration options. The product just doesn't have any future. In general, it's a mix of shiny syndrome objects, and also because sometimes iterations are just more boring and repetitive than starting something new from scratch. Besides, the less time you give your first step to be done, the sooner you will get it done. You know the Parkinson's law that says work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion? Well, that also applies to projects. So just set a time limit and try to release something. Of course, a bit of delay from here and there is not a big deal. The important thing is not to drag our feet on the things forever. Keep the momentum. In my physics class, I learned something interesting about Newton's law of momentum. It basically says that it takes more force to get a heavy object like furniture moving from a stop than it does to keep it moving once it's already in motion. This is because the object already has some momentum, which is a combination of its mass and velocity. So it requires less effort to maintain that momentum than it does to get the object started again from a stop. This is completely true, and it applies to anything you do. The first step is always the hardest, but once you take it, everything gets easier. So don't make the first step harder than it needs to be, and your first output might not be great, but who cares? The first piece of software that you write will be buggy and imperfect, but after hundreds of iterations, it can only get better. The first video of a famous YouTuber may have been mediocre, but it was a necessary first step that led to hundreds of iterations, eventually making them who they are today. Looking back, I'm glad I filmed myself 4 years ago. Even though the video was far from perfect, it was the imperfect first step that allowed me to keep filming and improving. Who knows what kind of opportunities this little YouTube channel can bring in the future. If this video helps you just even a little bit to overcome and take your first step towards your goal, then I am glad I made this video. What is the first step that you struggle to take in your own projects? Also, how many iterations you have gone through before completely giving up on a project? Let me know in the comments, as I'm curious to find out. Your first step might be to start your own startup, but before doing so, you should be aware of the sacrifices and other things that I talk in this video. Check it out. I release new weekly videos sharing startup tips and lessons learned while building mine. So hit the like and subscribe button and the bell notification so you won't miss any new release. Also follow me on Instagram for bite-sized short videos of the behind the scene of building a startup as a solo entrepreneur founder in Japan. See you in the next one. Bye.